Welcome again. We are officially starting our webinar on retrograde planets in the birth chart. Let me know where are you from, and also keep in mind that we will have time for questions. So if you have a question about a retrograde planet in your chart, we will have time for this. What I would like to do today is, first of all, start with a discussion, a conversation about the retrograde planets. I will do it the old-fashioned way with some notes here. So if you see me looking down, I just want to make sure I'm not forgetting anything. We'll talk about what are the retrograde planets, which of them can be retrograde and why. We'll talk about something very important, the difference between the retrograde planets and the normal planets. Something also very specific, which some of you may or may not know, are the stationary planets. That's like a kind of an edge case, which is even more important. And I want to talk about this as well. We'll also talk about the difference between the retrogradeness of the personal planets versus the transpersonal planets. That's also something I see that many people miss or kind of like misinterpret. And we'll talk about some popular misconceptions. So are there things that we believe which are not true? And again, if you have your questions, you can type them in the chat. But if we have a volunteer who would like me to look at their chart live, we can do that as well. For those of you who are live here with me on Zoom, welcome. Those on YouTube also, welcome. And also the other thing I will talk about for just a little bit is the new training, which we are starting with Mars Stars Astrology Academy. So in case you are interested in learning astrology as a foundation, and if you want to use it either at your work or separately, this training will probably help you a lot. So I will share a little bit about this. If you are interested, of course, you can always go to marsstars.net for all the information. I will share the links as well. Okay, we have people with 7 retrograde planets. Wow, that's pretty interesting. Okay, Kateri, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Thank you for volunteering. So let's get started first with what are the retrograde planets? Probably you have heard about this, mostly for Mercury. Mercury is the most popular retrograde planet, and the truth is that it's the planet which goes retrograde 3 to 4 times a year, which is quite often, and we really pay attention to this. But today I want to talk about the retrogradness of the planets in the birth chart and how it affects your life and what are the differences. So very quickly, the retrogradness of the planets is very important, just an illusion. We observe things from the Earth. And there is another approach, which is heliocentric astrology, which would look at things observed from the sun. So we are imagining that we are on the sun and we look at our solar system, that would be a heliocentric perspective. But most astrologers, well, at least me, I work with the geocentric astrology, which means it's important how things look like from the Earth, because this is relevant also to your experience here on the Earth. And it is just an illusion, but every now and then, some of the planets look like they're moving backward. The normal, regular motion of the planets is from Aries to Taurus to Gemini and so on. It's the regular movement, and also from the first degree in a ascending direction. So first, second, third, and so on. That's what we call regular or direct planet. But every now and then, some of the planets slow down their motion. At certain point, they literally stop, which means that for a couple of days, they remain on the same position. For example, actually last week, I believe we had Uranus stationary, Uranus turning retrograde. So Uranus was at around, I don't remember the exact degree, but let's say 15 degree in Taurus. So for a couple of days, the planet seems to be staying on the same degree to the minute. And then it slowly starts to move backward. And this movement, which looks like it's going backward, is what we call the retrogradeness. So if a planet is at 15 degrees Taurus, it will move towards the 14th degree rather than the 16th, which was the usual direct motion. So again, it's just an illusion. Why is this happening? There are certain astronomical rules, and I won't go into the details about the technicality because it can get really complex, and honestly, it doesn't matter so much for our interpretation. But because of the distance between the planets and the difference in their, what we call ecliptic, this is the path of the sun, but each planet also has its own path. And they have different shapes. And at a certain point, it looks like they're slowing down and then moving backwards because the Earth seems to move faster at this point. So again, it is just how it looks like from the Earth, but it's pretty important for us. So which planets can go retrograde? That's very interesting. All of the planets except for the sun and the moon. So we are talking about Mercury, very popular, Venus and Mars. Usually we also pay lots of attention to them, but we also have Jupiter, Saturn, which are the social planets, and Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, which are the outer planets. So 8 planets out of 10, which we usually use in astrology, every now and then are going retrograde. But why the sun and the moon don't? Again, I won't go into technicality, too much of astronomy. For me, the more important part is what is the meaning? Because every astronomical indication or something which is specific also is a symbol of something. For example, another thing from astronomy is that all of the planets are circling around their axis. Let's call it vertically. Only Uranus is horizontally moving in another direction. So we can find a meaning behind this, which is related to the eccentric part of Uranus, which wants to be different than others, which wants to move in another direction. So there are no coincidences, and every astronomical specificity has a deeper meaning. And the same is true also for the fact that the sun and the moon are never, ever retrograde. The sun is symbolizing our potential, our creativity, our individuality and expression. The moon is related to many things, but in a way, the moon represents life itself and our connection to life and our ability also to express whatever the sun is representing. So the sun, it's more like the core essence. The moon is what allows us to connect to life, to people. Of course, the moon also has other meanings like family, motherhood, and so on. But this is extremely important. The moon is also related to our ability to adapt to changes, adapt to life, anything at all. And those two symbolically are always supposed to move forward. Our individuality, our creativity, life as something, very general, as a symbol. This is supposed to move forward. It should never go backward. But the other planets every now and then have their retrograde phase. And symbolically, the retrogradeness means going back. So again, think about it. The planet, let's talk again about Uranus, moving from 13th to 14th to 15th degree. Then it stops symbolically and it moves backwards. And what happens is that the planet is crossing the same degrees for the second time. So it's a path that symbolically has already been crossed. And if we want to understand more about karmic astrology, about where are we coming from, this also has a very deep meaning. And what it shows is that we need to go backwards symbolically in whatever area is symbolized by this planet. And we may need to look at things from a different perspective, or we may need to learn a lesson in a new way, or a lesson that maybe we haven't mastered, or we need to reevaluate. So this is very important. The retrograde planet has already been there, which means that this planet already has this experience, but there is a need for something to be reevaluated or for something to be experienced on a different level. And the other thing is that once the planet ends her retrograde phase, she will go back through the same degrees for the third time. So this is also interesting, and it shows us that some lessons need to be repeated. And the retrograde planets are kind of like a symbol of this. So repetition of certain experience and the need to process that more on an internal level in a way. Another interesting symbol here is the past and the future. So we said a planet which is moving forward or following the regular motion is oriented on the future. So we can explore this as a new experience that needs to be gained. On the other side, a retrograde planet, as we said, is repeating something. And in some way, it's more related to the past. So if you have a retrograde planet, or if you are interpreting a chart with retrograde planets, one of the key words to remember is past, orientation on the past, and the need to reevaluate. So we already have this experience, but now we need to look at that in a new way, or we need to learn something on a different level. Something interesting also about the retrograde planets is that they are closer to the Earth. Again, this is astronomy, it's related to Kepler's laws, and I won't go into exploring the astronomy here, but it is just a fact, an astronomical fact, that when a planet is retrograde, it physically gets closer to the Earth. And that applies to all the planets which go retrograde, both personal and transpersonal. And if we talk about social and outer planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, they are really far away from the Earth. And when they are retrograde, they are also kind of like at their closest position to the Earth. But again, it's too far away. So for the social and the outer planets, even if they're kind of closer, it's not so significant compared to the overall distance. And I really don't have the numbers here, but we can probably find it somewhere in the astronomy books. But what's more important is the position of the personal planets: Mercury, Venus, and Mars. The distance between the Earth and those planets is again huge, of course, compared to, what we accept as close here on the Earth and far away. So again, it's a huge distance, but not that much. And when one of those planets is retrograde, is much closer to the Earth. Mars can get, if I'm not mistaken, up to 8 times closer during certain retrograde cycles. So the energy of those planets, Mercury, Venus, Mars, when they are retrograde, is kind of like closer, which in a way may also be considered as more accessible. So from one point of view, the retrograde planets can be experienced also more on a material level, even though when the planet is retrograde, we can also say that it works on an internal level as well. The retrograde planet is like, sometimes I imagine this planet as being a little bit shy, like in a way doing something like that and putting like an additional layer between her energy and the external world. So retrograde planets, especially, as we said, the personal ones, Mercury, Venus, Mars, psychologically are very important because they work on a deep internal level. And they are closer to the Earth, but sometimes we may struggle with expressing this energy externally. So it's not that easy for this planet, and it's almost like the energy doesn't flow in this direction. It's more working on an internal level. So this is also something that comes from astronomy, the closeness of the retrograde planets to the Earth, which has a meaning, just like we said, also past and the future. Another thing which is also kind of interesting and important is that when we have a retrograde planet, it's moving in the opposite direction of the sun and the moon. And we said the sun is our core self, our creativity, and also our individuality overall. The moon is life, the life force or life itself. So we need to explore this. And honestly, I think that this can turn into a pretty long philosophical discussion. But I want to invite you to think about this on your own, because you may also have your own insights when you look at things from this perspective, that a retrograde planet is symbolically moving in the opposite direction of the sun and the moon. So sometimes a retrograde planet may go against this. And probably here I should say that generally I don't like the negative, dark perspective. And my personal belief is that nothing in astrology is just bad. And I definitely don't believe that the retrograde planets are only bad. So we will explore this a little in a moment. But in a way, of course, they are specific and they do bring some challenges and difficulties. And in some way, they are moving in the opposite direction of the sun and the moon. And what it may feel like every now and then is that it may seem like certain part of us is going against what we consciously want or against what we need. And we know that the horoscope represents us. And sometimes it's easier to recognize certain indications, certain positions. We tend to like them, or for whatever reason. Of course, each case is individual, but sometimes we may recognize part of the chart as ours, and the rest can be projected on the external world. Usually there are people who play those roles. And sometimes a retrograde planet may feel like there is part of us which is going against what we consciously want. And this may seem a little bit like self-sabotage. It's not always that simple. So what I'm explaining here is a little bit like oversimplistic, and it's never just this, but you might want to explore this possibility. Could it be that sometimes you or the person whose chart you are looking at is probably self-sabotaging themselves, or they consciously want something and then the next time or day or whatever, they are doing something different? Or sometimes it may feel like a conflict. And with the social and outer planets, I don't think that you can feel this way. We'll discuss this in a moment. But with the personal planets, Mercury, Venus, Mars, there's definitely a deeper layer. So as we said, it seems like this planet is a little shy and she doesn't want to be seen that much. And it's almost like she's trying to escape. But the sun and the moon keep moving forward. They never stop. And it may feel like, time is moving forward and you seem to go in this direction as well, but there is part of you which is a little behind, or which may even want to slow things in a way. Again, it can get really philosophical, but I find this very interesting and important. So especially if you have a problematic planet, which is retrograde, you might want to look at things from this perspective. The other thing is about the speed of the planets. And this is also very important. Each of the planets has a regular speed. Each planet has a specific maximum speed and also an average speed, which is usually the most common. And also the planets can be really slow, especially those that can turn retrograde. Again, interesting fact that the sun has the most consistent speed. The speed of the sun for one day, and if you are not sure what speed means, it means what part of the zodiac the planet can go through within 24 hours. For the moon, this can be up to 15 degrees. This is the fastest planet. And if a planet is stationary, sometimes she may not move at all within one day and even more. So the sun, we said, never retrograde, and the sun has a very consistent, regular speed. The range there is really small, literally within few minutes. So the slowest speed of the sun is around 58 minutes, and the fastest is 62. So it's always around 1 degree. But the other planets, as we said, can go retrograde and their speed may vary. And something specific about the retrograde planets is that they are slower than direct planets. And I think that this is one of the most important factors, if it's not actually the most important one, which changes how we experience those energies and how they affect our life. And what does the speed mean? The speed literally means how fast things are happening regarding this life area, which is represented by the planet. For example, Mars is about our inner warrior, our personal will, our ability to make a decision, and even more importantly, take action on it. And people who have fast Mars or kind of like average speed, they seem to be capable of taking the actions when they want to. Of course, there are other factors like the aspects, like the signs, but the speed is also very important. And if the planet is retrograde, if Mars is retrograde, if Mars is slow, specifically, there might be a delay. This is also kind of like a key word for retrograde planets. There could be some delays. You might want to do something if we talk about Mars, but you hesitate. Or even if you have made the decision, you don't proceed into taking the action. And this is one of the biggest challenges when we talk about retrograde planets, that there is some kind of delay. And this is also one of the major differences with direct planets, that things may happen slower and sometimes we may miss the right moment. For example, with Mars, let's say there is a business opportunity. This is usually Mars related. So you hesitate, you think about it, should I do this or not? And until you make the decision, the opportunity is gone. Again, this is very simple example. Life is usually more complicated, but it may happen that your response could be delayed. And that is true for the personal planets, Mercury, Venus, Mars. So one of the major differences, again, is that the retrograde planets are much slower. Now, very quickly, I want to share with you how long are those cycles, so that you also know how specific it can be if certain planet is retrograde. Mercury, again, the most popular retrograde planet, is retrograde for approximately 3 weeks. 3 to 4 times a year. This year, 2021, Mercury is retrograde 3 times. If I'm not wrong, I believe last time it was 4 times last year. So 3 or 4 times for 3 weeks each year. Venus is retrograde for around 40 days, once in 16 months. So this is more rare, this is more specific, and because of that, it's more important. For Mars, the retrograde phase lasts around 80 days, so it's more than 2 months, and it happens once in 2 years. So that's the most specific case. And there was a calculation, which right now I can't remember, what was the percentage of people born with Mars retrograde. Maybe if some of you are good with maths, you can say it, but it was either 10 or 5%. So if every 2 years we have Mars retrograde for 2 months, so 22 months Mars is direct, 2 months it's retrograde. What should be the percentage? But is it 5? I guess it's 5. So, but anyway, it's a fact that Mars is the most specific retrograde planet. Then Jupiter and Saturn are retrograde for around 4 months each year. And the outer planets are retrograde for around 5 months each year. Pluto is even more than 5 months, around 5 months and a half almost. So what we see is that with the social and the outer planets, it's not that specific. It's not that rare to have them retrograde, which immediately means that it's not so important for the individual. This is like a general principle in astrology, that the more rare certain event is, the more specific and the more important it is for the individual. Astrology events or positions which last longer, they affect more the collective. Like, for example, the sign positions of the outer planets. They change rarely. Uranus needs 7 years to cross one sign. Neptune, even more. Pluto, sometimes even more, up to 30 years in certain signs. So that's not so important for the individual. It's more important for the collective. And when we talk about retrograde planets, this is very important to understand that there is a big difference between the personal planets and the transpersonal. Again, the personal are Mercury, Venus, Mars, and the social and the outer planets are the transpersonal. If you have a retrograde Jupiter, it's not such a big deal. If you have a retrograde Pluto, it's not such a big deal. If you have Mercury, Venus, or Mars, it's much more important. So this is something that we should remember. Again, also, if we look from the perspective of the speed of the planets, the outer planets, even the social ones, overall, they are pretty slow. Over 24 hours, usually they get through a couple of degrees. Saturn can go through minutes, around 10 minutes from the degree per day. We said the moon can go up to 15, Mercury can be more than 2 degrees. So when one of those planets is retrograde, it is slower, but again, generally this planet is really slow. So the difference is not so significant. It's kind of like similar with the distance between the Earth and those planets. It is closer, but again, it's not so significant. But for the personal planets, the difference can be much more significant. As I said, Mercury can have a speed more than 2 degrees per day. The Mars can be around half of the degree, Venus 1, 1.2 degrees. So that's a much faster planet overall. And when this planet is retrograde, it is a big deal because the difference is more significant, even based on maths. Just the numbers are showing this the same. So this is very important. Now I would like to talk about a very specific case, which are the stationary planets. And something interesting is that if you haven't explored this, you may not know that you actually have stationary planets. The planets are stationary at the very beginning and the very end of a retrograde phase. A couple of days before that, for Pluto, for example, this can be around a week before and after. With Mercury, it's 1-2 days. Venus, again, 1-2 days. Mars, maybe a little bit more, 2-3 days. So this is a very kind of like small window of time when the planet is stationary. And as we said, the planet moves in a with direct motion. At certain point, she's slowing down, then she stops. Then slowly she starts to move backward. So those days around the shift, before and after, are important. Those are the days of the stationary phase of the planet. And here, the outer planets and the social planets are also important. If you have a stationary planet, this planet in a way can turn into the most important planet in your chart. And it will definitely bring your attention and want something from you. And in a way, the planet will be accentuated. Somehow, usually it is also problematic, but we just cannot pretend that it's not there, because it's just, constantly bringing your attention there. So stationary planets are very, very important. They are more important than retrograde planets, for sure. It's quite simple if you are wondering how you should find out, how you can find this out. I haven't seen a software that shows this. Maybe there is, I don't know. My software does not show if the planet is stationary. I have to check this. And the way to do this is you just need to open the ephemeris, the tables with the degree and the position of each planet, and find the day when you were born or the person whose chart you are looking at is born, and then check what happens, let's say 2 weeks before and after that. And if you find that a planet is changing direction a couple of days before or after, with the outer planets, I would consider a week, sometimes even 10 days, then it means that the planet is stationary. And again, this can be a little tricky because the planet may be also direct in your chart. So you haven't noticed the planet is not retrograde and you're wondering why something does not feel so, the regular way. What is wrong here? So you may not know this, but you may have a stationary planet. And again, this planet will become extremely important. From a karmic perspective, it can be also important whether the planet is turning from direct to retrograde or from retrograde to direct, but I won't go into those details. Just keep in mind that it matters whether it's already happened and whether it's, in which direction the planet is shifting. Okay, now let's talk about some of the misconceptions. So what are some popular beliefs about the retrograde planets, which are honestly just misleading. The first thing is that they are really, really bad. This is not true. When someone says this is bad or good, I really want to ask the question, for what? Because it really depends on what you want, what you are working on, and from what perspective you are looking at things. Very quick, simple example. Mercury retrograde. Probably many of us have Mercury retrograde, and Mercury retrograde may bring challenges in the external role of Mercury, which is about communication, expression, connecting to others. This is more like the social role of Mercury. The retrogradeness can make things more problematic or slower or whatever, or the person may feel misunderstood by others. So there could be different things in this direction. So from that point of view, yes, this Mercury is more difficult. But if I ask you for what, and you say, well, I want to write, or I want to express something, or I have an idea about something, then Mercury retrograde is actually quite helpful, because Mercury also has an internal role, which is about thinking, ideas, making those connections internally. And for that, Mercury retrograde can work better than the so-called normal Mercury. And another thing, if Mercury is really fast, sometimes what we observe is that the person is very impatient or even sometimes superficial. So they are just, kind of like surfacing through things, learning something a little bit here, a little bit there. They can be very curious, but they may have kind of like problems with going more in depth because they want things to happen really fast. On the other side, Mercury retrograde, which, as we already said, is slower, can be much more patient with knowledge, with information, with learning, or even when they are connecting to their own ideas. So this is very important. Retrograde planets are not necessarily bad. It's true, again, for certain things, they are more specific. That is absolutely true. But for some things, they can be also more beneficial. So if you have many retrograde planets, and one of you here shared this with their chart, it does not mean that this is something bad or it's something awful or whatever. The other popular misconception is that if someone has many retrograde planets, they are what we call an old soul. It's a very interesting topic and question, which is more related to karmic astrology, how much experience the soul has. And the truth is that it's not easy to define this, even from the horoscope. And we may find certain indications which can give us some hints, but to say that if someone has many retrograde planets, they are an old soul, and if you don't have retrograde planets, you are a young soul, that's oversimplistic, and it's just not accurate. So you may or may not be an old soul, but it's much more complicated than just finding out how many retrograde planets you have. Okay, and what can we say about the psychological impact of this, of those planets, the retrograde planets? Internally, they can become much more important for us. So one of the main lessons is that we need to learn how to work with this energy internally. And I also believe that, as I told you, there are no coincidences and nothing is just happening just because. There is a meaning. And the retrograde motion of the planets is also something that we need. It's not something like, you know, like some kind of bug or whatever. It is supposed to happen this way. So we need those phases. We need to reevaluate things. We cannot always move forward, even if we want to. And I personally want to sometimes to rush ahead and do things. And yeah, it's great. But sometimes we need to slow down. Sometimes we need to do more internal work until we can accomplish something external. So this is one of the most important psychological influences of the retrograde planets, that you need to learn to work with them internally. And again, here I'm mostly talking about Mercury, Venus, and Mars. With the others, it's much more important if they are stationary. So, okay, now I'm open to your questions. If you have any, you may type in the chat. If we have a volunteer who also is on Zoom with me and wants to talk to me live, please let me know in the chat and we can look at this example. Okay. So, is there someone who wants to talk to me? Come on. You have the opportunity to ask me a question for your chart. So, and while you're thinking about this, I want to share with you a little bit about our trainings, which are starting already. One of the trainings we have is Foundational Natal Astrology, which is covering the very basics to the more advanced levels. And we have more than 50 hours of lessons, which you can access immediately and watch whenever you want to. And we also have live meetings for 5 months. We are having those sessions via Zoom and we are practicing together. I will be answering your questions if you have any. And we will have live discussions. Currently, we also have scholarships available. We have a 75% discount for people with disabilities and parents, children with disabilities. Currently, we also have a huge discount for everyone else. So if you want to learn astrology with us, you can sign up and let me see if I can. You can go to marsstars.net and find anything there as well. Let me see if I can post it here on Zoom. Okay. Interesting question about the nodes. Is it true that the North Node is usually retrograde? Yes. The nodes, what we kind of like accept as the norm is for them to be retrograde. Those who have them direct are the exception. And what would be the meaning of that can also be pretty symbolic. the notes are extremely important, and they actually deserve not just a whole webinar, but like a whole training discussing only that. But put shortly, the notes are about our lessons. And I do believe that the lessons are always internal. So, for example, we need to embrace a new quality, a new personal characteristic. But very often, or in some cases, we also need to do that in the external world. And when the note is direct, I recognize this as a sign that we should focus also a lot on the external role of this quality, or expressing it in the external world more. So it's, again, not something problematic. Honestly, I haven't seen someone having problems in their life if their notes are direct. But it is, again, something more specific. What does it mean to have 7 retrograde planets? This is a very general question, which I cannot answer without looking at the chart, because it may mean so many things. So I may try to answer this question, but I really need to look at the chart. Without the chart, it's just some guessing, which is not really helpful. So if you want to learn with us, you can check the website. We do have also an option for advanced students. If you already have knowledge in astrology, you can apply for advanced mentorship, which is also starting really soon. So let me see if we have a volunteer. Kiki. Kiki, would you like me to use your chart as an example? And okay, let's do this. You need to give me a minute to calculate the chart. So 40. Okay. Kiki, do you have an idea what is the time difference according to GMT? I can check it, but it will take a while to do that. So if you know, you may just type it in the chat. And for the others who are also here, one thing I want to share with you is that when we are looking at the chart of someone else and you are part of this experience, usually in a way it will resonate with you as well. So have an open mind is what I mean. Let me see if I can find the location. Zagreb. Yes, I found it. Okay, is it +2? +2 or 1? Yeah. Yeah, it is the possibility. The summer. So it must have been +2, I believe. Must have been +2. I will share the chart if you know it. If you know your chart, you will recognize it. Okay, 13 degrees in Pisces is the ascendant with this time of birth. Let me just share my screen. How do I share my screen? Okay. Okay, here it is. So this is Kiki's chart, who was kind enough to offer her as an example. How we define whether a planet is retrograde. Most softwares will include the small r letter next to the planet. Usually there is also a table somewhere out of the wheel, which also should have the R for retrograde planets. So Kiki has Mercury, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. So the only planet of those which can go retrograde, which is not, is Venus. All of the others that can be retrograde are actually retrograde. So that's pretty interesting. And of course, this is a very specific case, but there should be some kind of meaning behind this. Venus is the only direct planet from those that may not be direct. Venus is in Virgo. So essentially, Venus is not that strong. Venus is ruling the south node. Venus is ruling the moon. Okay. On the other side, we have Mercury and Mars. Those are the really important ones. And social and outer planets retrograde as well. So Mars is pretty interesting. Mars is exalted. So in a strong sign position, Mars in Capricorn is pretty strong, but he is retrograde. So look how interesting things are mixed. Venus is the only direct planet, but she is essentially weak. So Virgo is not a comfortable sign for Venus. On the other side, Mars is in a strong sign, but he is retrograde. So that must create some kind of imbalance or something which may feel like, I would say, like a contradiction in a way. For Mars, I think that the retrogradness can be kind of like the most uncomfortable, because Mars is supposed to move forward. Mars is a planet which is active usually externally. It's the warrior, the protector, the achiever, nowadays the one who competes, the business owner or whatever. So Mars is very externally oriented, as you know, this is the nature of the planet. But Mars retrograde is much slower and is also like working more internally. So this may create some discomfort with how initiatives are taken and how decisions are made. And in certain way, this Mars can be too cautious. Mars in Capricorn is also very cautious, usually. He doesn't like taking risks. But when Mars is also retrograde, it may become even more uncomfortable. So we see a person who can be pretty cautious with their decisions, with the actions that they take. On the other side, and this is the most important, I can give you the cookbook interpretations of the planets when they are retrograde, when something is happening, but then what's even more important is how we interpret that with the rest of the chart. So what I find interesting here is that on the other side, Kiki has Jupiter in first house, close to the ascendant, even if it's not in exact conjunction, it's close enough. So what that means in some way is that this person needs to do something significant. Jupiter is also essentially very strong. Jupiter is in the sign that he rules, Pisces. Jupiter has a trine with the sun. Mars also has an opposition with the sun. So those two planets symbolically might be in a conflict with each other. And their connection with the sun emphasizes that even more, even though we don't have an actual aspect between them. As you can see, no line here. But those two planets have such different needs. This Mars needs to evaluate things. This Mars needs to be cautious, to be logical and responsible. On the other side, the sun wants to, Jupiter. Jupiter wants to expand. Jupiter wants to be significant. Jupiter wants to do something remarkable. Other planets which are important, Uranus. Uranus is also really accentuated, and Uranus is on top of MC. So the Uranus energy is also really strong in this chart, which again can pull in the direction of making decisions faster, taking certain risks, doing something unpredictable. So what I see here is some kind of inner conflict. Part of Kiki wants to be cautious, to avoid risks. That's definitely true when it comes to emotional matters. Venus is in Virgo squared by Saturn. So, but overall, generally, part of her wants to be sure of what will happen, what the outcome will be, what the result will be. She does not want to risk that much, but another part of her does want that. And by the way, the sun in the fifth house also emphasizes the topic about risk. And also the planets in eighth house are doing this. Fifth and eighth house are related to risks in a different way. So that's very interesting. What may happen in such situation is that the person may recognize more one of those polarities, and it may seem like something in the external world is pulling them or forcing them. With Mars retrograde, especially when he is in opposition with the sun, sometimes what may happen is also that she may hesitate, let's say, for a while, but then she may get too frustrated, and then she may do something impulsive. So it's a little bit like switching between the two, I guess, waiting for a while, then trying to rush things too much. And it may create some kind of discomfort. Okay, Kiki confirms that is correct. Yeah. So this Uranus has a square with Jupiter, but I think that they are working together in this chart. The Sun in 5th house as well. The Sun has a trine with Jupiter, quincunx with Uranus. So those 3 planets here, even though there is a square, they seem to work as a team in this chart. There's definitely a huge creative potential. The Sun in 5th house is really strong, aspect with Uranus, Uranus on top of MC. So a very strong potential. But I guess that the speed or how fast things can happen can be a more problematic theme. Again, because of the conflict. This Mars retrograde can be kind of like against other planets. Sometimes what may happen with this is also some anger issues, self-aggression or aggression towards ourselves. And I would say probably unconsciously, the person may hurt themselves in a certain way. This opposition is not related to health houses, even though, well, Mars is ruling the intercepted Aries. And the other important thing here, Mars also rules the North Node. And if the time of birth is really accurate, Aries is intercepted in 1st house. So the Mars Aries energy is kind of problematic, but at the same time, extremely important. And yeah, there is also a conflict between the individuality or the personal desires and the culture or the community or friends or society. And the person may feel like they can't make everyone happy. It's either them or everyone else. And it's almost like a choice. So with the South Node in Libra, in 7th house, in conjunction with the Moon, Kiki may tend to be more or less people pleaser, or at least trying to or wanting others to be happy or to like her or to be okay. But she needs to pay more attention to herself, to her individuality, to express her own individual will. So very, very interesting combinations. So Mars is essentially strong, which brings some good qualities for Mars. On the other side, Mercury, which is the other important retrograde planet, is in a weak sign position. This is a fall position for Mercury. So not a really strong one. Look how different things are in the chart. So essentially strong planets and essentially weak. It's almost like the two extremes. So Mercury retrograde in Leo on the cusp of 6th house, having a trine with Saturn, square with Pluto. Okay, this can turn into a pretty anxious mind, I would expect. And someone who can get too fixed or worried about particular ideas. A retrograde planet, as we said, is slower, and she may also get more fixated or fixed, what's the word for this, on something. And for Mercury, these are usually our ideas or some plans, or it could be a friendship or a connection with someone else. But usually it's the mind, the mental work. So Mercury is also in a fixed sign. Leo is a fixed sign and is retrograde. And this square with Pluto kind of like emphasizes this even more, that there might be certain ideas that can make her kind of worried or anxious, and those things may repeat all over again. So the mind can be pretty anxious and very interesting. Also more focused on the internal, not really open to the external. But on the other side, as we said, there is another part of her which is pretty oriented on other people. This is related to her moon in Libra with the South Node and all of that in 7th house. So in certain way, that's very interesting. In certain way, she is oriented on other people, but the mind may stay a little bit more detached, and internally her own ideas are really important. This Mercury also has a great trine with Saturn, which can really help with logic, with some kind of structure to the thinking process. So this mind can also be very productive. Mercury is ruling 3rd house, 4th house, 7th house. So I'm wondering, Kiki, is your job somehow related to Mercury? IT. Okay, so yeah, it is. It is Uranus. It is Uranus related, but also Mercury. So yeah, so the mind can really help with this. How do you feel about the things which I explored, which I shared? Does that resonate with you? Do you have a different perspective? Yeah, it does. Do you feel like you tend to go back to like the same ideas or the same worries or something which you cannot seem to let go? This may also happen with Mercury. Uranus on MC pushes for changes, of course, but I always reevaluate. But in the end, I always risk. Yeah. Okay, yeah, you're summarizing it very well. The fact that in the end you are risking, I believe, is a positive thing for you, because, of course, of the North Node. The North Node is in Aries and in 1st house. So actions must be taken. And the Sun, 5th house and 1st house are very important for our individuality. The Sun is in your 5th house, so this brings creative potential. And in a way, also a strong individuality. So my understanding of your chart is that internally, you do have this. You have, I would say, like a healthy ego, Now the next step is to kind of like listen to this, or embrace this, or express it and take action in the external world. So the inner potential is here. The outer actions must be taken, but that's, yeah, it works very well. Of course, the trine between the Sun and Jupiter helps a lot here. Yeah. Kiki, is there anything specific you want to ask me about a planet, or something you want to share, or have you recognized one of those planets to be in a way more important? Pluto also seems to stand out here. Pluto is in Scorpio, and I don't consider the sign positions of the outer planets as strong or weak for the individual, even though technically it is the sign that Pluto rules. So, but it's not what makes it strong in the individual chart. What makes Pluto strong is the fact that Pluto is in 8th house, and Pluto is in conjunction or really close to the South Node. So this Pluto is also very, very strong. And this Pluto also wants to take some risks. Okay, let me see if there is anything else. Pluto is really slow. In this chart, I believe that Pluto is almost stationary. Yeah. Pluto is very, very important. Yeah, I'm quite brave and bold, independent. Yeah. Yeah, it works very well. You think that Jupiter is stationary as well? Yeah, it could be. Yeah, we can open the. Okay, I can show you very quickly how we do this. Just give me a second for those who maybe missed the beginning or just want to see how it actually works. So I will search for ephemeris. Just let me switch to English. Ephemeris for 1986, the year when Kiki was born. Usually, you may find also there are books with ephemeris, but you can find them free online. So the year, one moment please. So Kiki is born 14th of July 86. So we have the ephemeris for 1986. We need to find July. Okay, the middle of July, the 14th. So here are the positions of her planets at midnight, the day she was born. So we want to check if a planet is turning direct or retrograde a couple of days before or after she was born. And we may immediately find here that on the 15th, so on the very next day, Pluto is turning direct. See, so this is a stationary Pluto. See how for a couple of days, Pluto is on the very same degree and minute as well. And after that also. So yes, this is a stationary Pluto. With Jupiter, we have the opposite case. So the day before, Jupiter has turned retrograde. So yeah, it is true. Both of the planets are stationary. This is extremely rare. First of all, it's quite rare to have a stationary planet, but two, it's a big deal. So the way to define it is the check the time when the planet changes direction. So not your birthday, but the actual date. So Jupiter changes at 22 degrees 51 minutes. 3 minutes before and after that, and I mean 3 minutes from the degree, the planet is stationary. That applies to all of them. So at 22 degrees 48 minutes, Jupiter is becoming stationary. It has happened on the 7th of July. So here begins the stationary phase, 3 minutes before the shift and 3 minutes after that. So up to 22 degrees, 54 minutes. In this case, it will be, yeah, it will go back. So actually it's again to the 48, sorry. So here, if the planet is direct, then it's in the other direction. So until the 19th, within this time frame, the planet is stationary. So again, you may do this with your own chart and check if you have stationary planets. Okay, so any other questions anyone may have? Thank you, Kiki, for offering your chart. It's quite interesting. Yeah, all right. So let me. Mm-hmm. What does it mean if the planets are stationary? It means that they immediately attract more attention. And in a way, they are also slower, but there is lots of intensity. With Jupiter, there can be Jupiter stationary, there can be fixation or on some kind of goals. For example, you set up a goal, or you dream about something, or you imagine something, and time goes by, things are changing in a way, and this goal may or may not be relevant anymore. It can be difficult for you to adjust. You are more fixated when it comes to goals. It could be about certain beliefs or values. Sometimes it can be very positive, because imagine how consistent and motivated the person can be. But there is something rigid about the stationary planets. We are focused on them. So a little bit of flexibility, a little bit of adaptation is required. Usually the motivation to succeed, to do something, is also more emphasized, which can be, of course, very positive. With Pluto stationary, it really brings lots of strength. Usually those are very active people. Internally, there is lots of intensity. But with Pluto, we may also have some kind of fixation on something, certain idea, certain goal, certain state. So from one side, there is lots of energy, but it's difficult to let go. It's difficult to be flexible in regards to this planet. Usually people with stationary Pluto you cannot tell there's something with their Pluto when they are children. It gets triggered later, but very often around the teenage years, suddenly they change. In a way, they can become really independent, or like they may have issues with discipline, or in a way they transform, and they may have kind of like some issues with the groups or social things, or they just a very strong energy is awakening within them. And usually we are very mature at this age. I guess that there are people who are mature even when they're teenagers, but most of us are not. And it might be difficult to navigate this energy, especially at this younger age. So very, very interesting chart. I hope I have answered your question. Elena is asking a very good question. What does it mean when a planet is retrograde in progressions? It is very important. For the personal planets, by the way, Kiki, you might want to check whether in progressions Mars has turned direct. Mercury is definitely direct. Mercury is retrograde for 20 days. So if you are more than 20 years old, which you are, Mercury is already direct. Also, it's interesting that if we have a normal life, I mean, normally long, 50, 60, hopefully more years, all of us at a certain point will have Mercury retrograde. If we are born in progressions, I mean, if you are born with Mercury retrograde, then it does turn direct at a certain point. If your Mercury is direct in your natal chart, and hopefully you live a long life, it will turn retrograde in progressions for 20 years approximately. Mars may or may not be already direct because Mars is retrograde for, we may check this very quickly. So roughly, we said the middle. So here is Mars turning direct on the 12th. So yeah, how many years are those? 12 years. And then some 17, so 29, around the Saturn return. So plus minus around 29, 30 years, Mars has turned direct in progressions, and that helps, by the way. It's interesting, Kiki, if you have noticed whether something has changed in your life after that, after the age of 29, 30. Probably it has. It's not necessarily like a one-time event. It can be more like a process. Yeah. Moved abroad. Yeah, and in terms of the expression of Mars, did it change in a way? That's also interesting. Elena has retrograde Venus in progressions. Yeah, I have seen this. Well, usually there is some kind of crisis around the shift. With Mercury, a crisis might be a strong word, but there is a change. Sometimes people may move to a new places with Mercury. They may go back to a place they have been before. The way they communicate with people changes. They may become more introverted in a way, so communication shifts. With Venus, usually the most significant are the shifts. So the year when Venus changes direction. And this may work in two ways. So from retrograde to direct and the other way around. I have seen a chart, for example, with Venus turning retrograde in progressions. The woman was planning a wedding in a relationship, happily together and so on. The night before the wedding, literally, he caught him with another woman. Wedding was canceled, relationship was ended. So obviously this has been a huge shock and crisis. I can't remember right now what was the sign position or the aspect. Pay attention if there are aspects at this point, they will be extremely important. But usually, of course, it's not always that dramatic like this example. There were other helpful factors, but usually there is some kind of shift. I have seen a man who had Venus retrograde in his birth chart, and in progressions, Venus turned direct. At this year, he had a child. He had twins, and symbolically, his heart was opened by this event. So again, there has been lots of intensity, some drama around this, but again, a big shift in his life. I have seen Mars shifting directions in progressions. It really depends what is ruled by the chart. Sometimes it can be problematic. Things are kind of like shifting, and it can be unpredictable. It can be the feeling we may have is also feeling stuck. When things are slow, we may feel like it's not moving, I cannot move, I cannot change. Again, it's not always that dramatic, but there can be some feeling of stuckness. It happened last year. Yeah, so it's pretty soon. Yeah. It's not always that dramatic, but you need to work with this planet on a different level. The planet turning retrograde in progressions means that it all starts from inside. And more or less, that's always true. But with the retrograde planets, it's even more true. Yes, more internally. With Venus, it always starts with self-love and acceptance. Always. Staying true to your own values. What you like the most, what you want the most. Not pleasing others, not doing something because of others, but because of yourself. Yeah. Okay, so 90 minutes passed. Thank you so much for joining me. I think we had an issue with sharing this on YouTube. I think I shared it on my wrong other channel. It doesn't matter. Thank you for joining me here on Zoom. If you are interested in learning more astrology, go to the website marsstars.net. Under the courses menu, you will find the options. Natal astrology and also the advanced mentorship. Those two are starting really soon. So have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you have a wonderful summer. I'm planning other topics for the near future. If you have concrete requests, something you want me to discuss, something you want me to talk about in a webinar or a video, you can send me your suggestions to support@marsstars.net. So have a wonderful day, and I will see you soon.